I am a cripple, so I cannot work without two crutches. My left thigh has been broken and I've been unable to labor the last 2 years. All my property consists of the large iron kettle, $1, 5 old chairs, 84 cents, 1 guest chair, 50 cents, a little crockery, $2, 2 kettles, $3, 1 6-quart pot, 50 cents. These are the words of Robin Starr, a black Revolutionary War veteran 37 years after the war. Soldiers like Starr sacrificed a great deal for the idea of an independent nation, one in whose prosperity they thought they would share. Starr, whose birth name is no longer known, was born in Africa, kidnapped, and shipped across the Atlantic Ocean through the Middle Passage. This was a grueling and often fatal trip that millions of enslaved Africans endured. Starr was brought to Danbury, Connecticut, and was sold to the Starr family. When Josiah Starr was drafted, he told his slave, Robin, that he would be going in Josiah's place. Josiah also told Robin he could use whatever money he made to purchase his freedom. Robin joined the Continental Army in January 1777 and would serve for 6 years. Other black soldiers in the Revolutionary War had to pay their enslavers for their labor while fighting for America. Some were able to save enough of their wages to purchase freedom upon their return. Nearly 4 times more enslaved people joined the British Army than the Continental. Fighting for England nearly guaranteed their freedom, while joining the Continental Army would not.
They wanted to be free, and some were, but ultimately, I think there are ideals of freedom, right? And feeling as though that you have autonomy. And so I think that just drew many of them to join with the British.
When serving in the war, black soldiers played many crucial roles.
They've always been in this country's wars and have always been part of the process of this country, even though they were denied basic citizen rights.
Starr fought in 7 battles. In autumn of 1776, he was heavily engaged at the Battle of Lake Champlain, where a small fleet of American ships, led by Benedict Arnold, met the British. The American ships endured hours of British fire. The combat only ended when darkness fell. There were many casualties on the American side, and Robin found himself injured. As his fellow soldiers carried him to safety, did he wonder how much more blood he would lose in the name of his country? Would this cause serve him as he served it? When George Washington took command of the Continental Army in 1775, he announced, quote, "Neither Negroes, boys unable to bear arms, nor old men unfit to endure the fatigues of the campaign are to be enlisted." Washington, like many others, was afraid to arm the enslaved. This was later changed as the Continental Army became increasingly more desperate for men. The decisive victory at Yorktown shattered British political will and led directly to the 1783 treaty recognizing American independence. Starr was awarded the Badge of Military Merit by George Washington for his long service and loyalty. Across the battle lines, those black men who fought for the British were given their freedom. But many, like Starr, who had fought on the side of freedom and liberty, were told that they would need to return to enslavement. Starr, a decorated veteran, serving since the first year of the war, was faced with the possibility of returning to Danbury and servitude under Josiah Starr. However, during his service, he had saved money and with this he was able to purchase his freedom. This was not the case, however, for a number of veterans who had to return to slavery. So why did any of them fight for the Continental Army? Were they driven by a passion for freedom and American patriotism, or were they simply out of options?
The people in that army, whether they are of color or not, are the people with the fewest options in their own home communities, as is often the case, right? So in some cases, enslaved men were given the opportunity to receive their freedom, and in some cases not. And in Connecticut, we have cases of both. Beyond that, there may be ones that were quite similar to what some of the poorer white soldiers' motivations were. A suit of clothes made of wool and some employment, even though it was $6 and 2/3 of a dollar a month, might have looked better than what their economic prospects were at home.
It seemed that this new democratic society would leave them behind.
There's a gap between who's actually considered part of this this ideal of a democratic society. Like, who's really part of it? Like, they were clearly kind of outside the context, right? And so it's my belief that there's obviously going to be some differences in how those individuals are going to be treated societally in their communities when they come back home.
Even once enslaved veterans had bought their personal freedom, they were not truly independent. There were many rules that freed slaves had to follow about where they could live and work, and often were viewed as a burden upon society. After buying his freedom, Robin married Lily Starr. Lily's previous husband, who was Robin's comrade, had died and left her his land, making her a black female landowner, a very rare thing for that time. Lily and Robin lived there together in Sharon, Connecticut. They had one son, Abel Starr. But times grew tough for the Starrs. Their dreams of true independence faded. They had to sell their land back to Robin's former commander. The deprivations of war took a toll on Robin's health and his ability to work. On the 44th anniversary of American independence, Robin Starr signed his pension with an X, unable to write his own name since he was illiterate. It was often difficult for men to get their pensions after the war, since they needed witnesses or evidence to prove their service in the war.
The first pensions were available, federal pensions. And for those, you had to prove that you had served at least 9 months in the Continental Army or Navy. They weren't giving any militiamen pensions at that time, or privateers, and that you weren't a drunk, and that you were destitute.
Robin Starr died in 1832, a few months after William Lloyd Garrison began publishing The Liberator, the nation's foremost abolition newspaper. Garrison's fiery rhetoric of the evils of slavery would push the nation toward another conflict, this time state against state. The Civil War would sweep up the grandchildren of Robin and Lily Starr. Louis, Josiah, and Charles Starr served in the Civil War. Charles died in the war, while Josiah and Louis were both wounded and discharged. Did they serve in the Civil War to try to share freedom with all? To follow in Robin's footsteps? Or did they enlist for the economic opportunity the war presented?
You hear Josiah being mentioned and his brother. They always revert back to Robin. Like, you never hear them mentioned without mentioning Robin. Like, and it's like years and years and years later, they start mentioning back to grandfather every time. So that tells me that Robin was revered in some way. And I got to imagine they did too, and they wanted that.
The Starr family lies buried in the Calhoun Cemetery in Cornwall, Connecticut. However, Starr, a Revolutionary War veteran who was awarded the Badge of Military Merit, had no gravestone until 2026, when students from the Cornwall Consolidated School and historian John Mills advocated to honor him with a gravestone.
As I was going through the process of acquiring a cenotaph headstone for him to be installed at Calhoun Cemetery, I knew that he had been given that badge of merit. And I knew that there was record of 3 other individuals that also had something that was called a badge of merit. The VA didn't believe that was the case. So they asked me to send proof. And so I sent them the land records that listed. And they eventually agreed to put that on his cenotaph. But they said they believed that was something different than the badge of merit that the white men received. Now, I don't know what the basis for their response that way is. Either there's an understanding that heroism and service at that time for an African American had its own limitations of what you could be credited for, and thus the historians at the VA, understanding the time, recognized that can't be. So they were questioning it. Either it's that, or their current day perspective of value of an African American of the time was causing them to question it. And that context tells you what that challenge was for me to get them to even put that on the stone. Gives you an inkling into the difficulties in trying to highlight in a similar fashion as white Americans of the time.
This is a reenactment of the Battle of Yorktown from 1977. In it, no black soldiers are depicted. This is reflective of a common vision of the American Revolution, from which the black soldiers have been erased. Yet the best estimates by historians suggest 1 in 10 soldiers in Washington's army was black. Black soldiers were not given the same amount of respect and honored as white soldiers were, and their service was eventually forgotten or suppressed. Despite the accomplishments of soldiers like Starr being swept under the rug, it is not too late to uncover and celebrate them. While each had their individual motives for serving, they fought valiantly and suffered hardships to help Americans gain freedom, even if it was at the cost of their own.